It's Inappropriate Characters.
Hello, this is the RPG Pundit, the final boss and internet shitlords. And I'm here with you live, as usual, with Venger Satanis and Grim Jim. And tonight we're having the demonetization special, where we're talking about all kinds of interesting recent controversies. I thought that we would kick off with the fact that mostly what we're going to be talking about tonight, let's get honest about this, is the screw-ups of my other two co-hosts, you could say. Because these two guys, I mean, you know, I like to think that I'm a controversial character, but I'm just controversial by accident, right? And that I have very strongly held opinions about certain things, and that these are the things that I will stand up for, right? But Venger and Grim here, they've never met a hill to die on that they don't want to run right up. You know, like they're running around hill country. They're looking for any possible hill of controversy to get themselves killed.
I do need the exercise, so
don't we all?
It is good cardio, yeah. So in this week, I had no real controversy of my own. I tend not to have my own controversies, but I did, you know, get involved in events going on in the gaming world, which we'll talk about shortly. But if I'm not mistaken, this week, Venger took one look at the straight pride parade thing that's happening in Boston and said, oh yeah, I want to comment publicly about that. And then Grim Jim saw this event in the UK, in this gaming convention, where a bunch of people had complained that their DM had supposedly raped them all in the game. And Grim said, yes, that will certainly help my reputation if I jump in and defend this DM.
Well, so, it's not going to hurt it, let's face it. It can't be hurt anymore.
It can only go up.
Stop, I'm already dead.
Guys. Where do we begin?
Should we start with the UK Games Expo drama? That's that's been a pretty big one. Okay, so
explain it for the crowd.
Yeah, the UK Games Expo is the biggest, most proper games convention now in the UK. It kind of took over when EuroGenCon stopped being run at all, really, and that kind of crew broke up. And it's a more sort of general games event. There's a lot more board games. It's not just role-playing games, but it has a healthy amount of role-playing games there. And it's been running for a good old while. But it's only relatively recently it's got really big. Anyway, they have sign-up games, RPG games. Like a lot of conventions have begun to now, you have to buy tickets that you then spend essentially to participate in games. It's an innovation I'm not particularly fond of. But you pay some money, you get your ticket, you sign up for a game based on the sign-in sheet, and you play. So a bunch of people went and joined the game of a fairly veteran guy who's run a lot of demo games for a very long time for a lot of companies and off his own back, mostly at UK Games Expo. It seems, you know, he runs multiple games there every year and has done for about 10 years, and he likes subverting genres and mixing and matching. So I don't know if this will mean anything to a lot of you, but one of his games that I'd heard of that's perhaps most notorious was kind of Dad's Army versus the Deep Ones. So it kind of mixes kind of childish comedy and other bits and pieces.
I'm Canadian, so I get that reference. I'm not too sure.
It's a British comedy about the home guard in World War II.
Doomed.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
Okay. So this game was meant to be a kind of horror comedy, sort of lads culture thing, sort of taking aspects of Hostel and mixing them with the in-betweeners or porkies, the kind of dirty, silly sex comedy stuff, but mixing it with horror. But he was running it using the sequel to Tales from the Loop, which is Things from the Flood. It's a whole combination of things that have contributed to the drama. So he's running this game, and the people in it are pretty much as you'd expect as the story unfolds. They're the kind of living cartoons you might expect to be behind a drama like this. So it starts out, they're going on a Club 18 to 30 holiday. They're getting their money and stuff together. Shenanigans ensue, whatever. And then at one point, their tour rep drugs them, and they wake up naked and chained in the back of a van, get thrown out of the van and told to run because this is all a setup for them to be hunted. It's clearly identified as a horror scenario, 18 plus. The characters were all 18 plus. Everything was flagged up. The influences were flagged up, though not hostile, because that would have given away what was going on. Now, for some reason, these players interpreted the fact that they woke up naked in a van, chained up, meant that they'd been gang raped for some reason. There was supposed to be a side effect for the drug was that they had diarrhea and the shit themselves. All right, it's not, and that's why they were naked. It's not the greatest of plot devices, bit puerile, bit childish, but whatever. But for some reason, they interpreted, waking up with sore bottoms and in chains and all this as their characters having been gang raped. They still sat through the rest of the scenario. They still had a conversation with the games master at the end of it that seems to have been a bit confused. And then after all of that, later on, they went running to Twitter to say, I've just had the most awful game ever. The GM saw fit to gang rape our characters. They hadn't raised an official complaint with the convention at this point. There was no graphic rape scene. I've interviewed the GM. He never intended for there to be one. He forgot to mention the poo, but ran ostensibly the same scenario at another point, and that went off fine without a hitch. But this blew up, as these things tend to, on Twitter, and he ended up being thrown out of the con, banned from running any more scenarios for the foreseeable future. I think banned from attending the convention for the foreseeable future, and all seemingly on the basis of an inference from his description that he never intended in the first place, was never intended in the scenario that these people had. So it's kind of a classic case of overreaction. And to me, it smelled of the kind of witch hunt and stupidity that I've been subjected to multiple times and am again as a result of standing up for this guy. So I didn't want him to go unsupported or unable to give his side of the story. And that's why I intervened. And that's why I've got a lot of flack. There's a lot of other details to this story. That's as short as I can compress the actual story itself.
So this was the moment when you looked at this situation and said, how can I complicate my life with this, right? Okay. So what, do you know this DM? Do you know this guy personally, or did you reach out to him?
I think he's attended an indie con that I've been at as well in the past. I haven't played in any of his games because they didn't particularly.
He's not like a good friend of yours or something like that.
He's not like a good friend. I wouldn't have recognized him or anything. And he may not have been to IndieCon. It may have been someone else running his scenario. But I remember I'd heard about the Dad's Army versus the Deep Ones scenario that he's seemingly known for.
So as I understand it, after you interviewed this guy, this caused all of the usual suspects to go up in arms because, of course, here's Grim Jim defending rape. That's what they always try to hook on you there.
Yeah.
And they went to Satine Phoenix, who we've talked about before, and demanded that she publicly denounce you, basically, and unfriend you and all of this sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean,
for a while like Satine wasn't going to do that, but then she went around and did after a lot of trying to kind of argue against it. I suspect what happened there was that some of the SJWs in Wizards said to her, look, either you denounce this guy or you're finished here or something like that, right? So
I think it was just the stress and strain. I mean, I know what it's like to be targeted by these people, and it's utterly relentless. And that's not particularly how she wants to spend her time. I mean, I don't want to talk too much about what's been done to me, because even if this is it happening again, it's old news. I think what's happened to this Games Master, there's no harm in me.
Okay, but hang on. You're the most interesting part of the story here, because you didn't run this game. You didn't play in this game.
No.
But you decided to comment about it. And so that instantly was enough for a horde of leftist assholes on Twitter to try to destroy you, right?
Well,
and
now,
people connected to you like in Phoenix and demanding, Maoist-style public disavowal, right?
I'm a leftist, right? And I believe in people having a right to reply and a right to defend themselves and being considered innocent until they're proven guilty. So I would hesitate to call any of these people leftists because they've thrown all that in the bin. I don't blame Satine at all. I know what it's like. We had a private conversation about some of it in which we fundamentally disagreed about some of the approaches to this stuff. But I mean, we disagree and we get on. So I just think she buckled under the pressure. I don't blame her or hold any ill will towards her at all, but it operates like a cult. This is like being called a suppressive person in Scientology or being shunned by the Jehovah's Witnesses or something. It's like, you disown this guy or we will disown you. So that's sinister, but I really want to try and concentrate on what happened with this guy. I started off by questioning it because what they had initially described was, nothing had actually been described to them. There was no graphic rape scene. They just woke up naked, saw, and assumed that meant they'd been gang raped. And so I was kind of...
Hang on one sec. But if you listened to the very initial reports of this on social media, the impression that the people that commented about this, because of course they were looking for to try to prove that all gaming is toxic, basically, especially white male gaming, right? They went and made it sound as though this guy had spent 2 hours describing in detail each of them being sodomized or something like that. Right? Yeah, that wasn't at all what happened. Right.
No, it was very hard to get at the truth of what had actually happened, and I'm still not sure that I have. It's not for want of trying, because, well, I'm in quite a lot of gaming Facebook groups and things, and wherever this came up, as of course it did, because it's a big story, every time someone tried to discuss it, the comments ended up closed. The woman who made the initial complaint on Twitter turned up in a few of the groups and demanded that they shut down discussion and delete the posts because it was re-traumatizing her. And then when I reached out to the guy and interviewed him to get his side, she was instantly on social media everywhere telling everyone to block and report me and to not show anyone this interview that gave his side of the story. It's all very right. Even if he was guilty of the worst version of what the original claimants actually said, which was an off-camera rape scene happening, even if that was true, I think their behavior is utterly reprehensible.
Okay, so I've got a kind of a devil's advocate question for you here. First, it's a two-part question. First, do all of the people who played this session appear to be unanimous in their impression of what happened and its inappropriateness? And second, did you try to reach out to any of them for their version of the story?
I think there were 4 players. I think it's 2 of which have reported back similar things, but I think they're of a like mind. From everything I saw from this woman on Facebook and Twitter and elsewhere, it didn't seem to me that she would be amenable to anyone reaching out to talk to her. And, you know, all these people have me blocked, so it's a real chore to try and find any way of talking to them. But I figured their side of the argument had such utter free reign and everyone was just believing it, that to make my interview balanced and to talk to both would not be redressing the balance anyway, and it didn't seem like they wanted to talk to me, let alone anyone else. So I didn't think of it as too much of a problem, because
Fair
I was
enough.
just adding some weight to the other side of the scales, really.
Well, I've almost said everything I want to say about this, except that I'll note one thing. You might not like them being called leftists, the people who have spent the last attacking you, but I guarantee you that not one of these people is a member of the Ted Cruz Facebook fan club. Not one of these people is a Jeb Bush Republican. Not one of them wears a MAGA hat, and not one of them is going to the straight pride parade. Okay, so you know. You're here in the context of how we define things in 2019. You're the dinosaur, right? You're the one that is still trying to hold on to a definition that nobody else on your side seems to want to hold on to anymore.
Think of me as their conscience. So what was that, Venture?
There's you, and there's this guy Aaron on Twitter. Who was also defending you like I was. And the game master in question. You two are like the old school liberals that, you know, and I was there too up until a little while ago, that, you know, definitely leaned to the left and consider themselves liberal or Democrat or, you know, left leaning, whatever. But then I just encountered too much of the social justice warrior nonsense and, you know, everything else. And it made me run screaming like the other way. That original, because I saw that original tweet by that woman who was allegedly traumatized by that game. And I could tell just from the get-go that it was just like virtue signaling clickbait that was just getting people to, like, you know, pile on with, you know, their morality and like, how dare you, like, game master, and, you know, reference or suggest or indicate that something unpleasant happened to one or more of the player characters. I mean,
There's a kind of. Sorry, I wanted to note one thing here. This game at this con, it was listed for like 18 plus, right? Like I believe that's what I understood about it, right?
Yeah, so I've got screenshots of the sign-in sheets for the games that he was scheduled to run on my blog. So
this is never a game meant for minors to play, right? So this leads to an interesting question, right? In 2019. Is it possible to actually run a game with something controversial, given that most, you know, 19 to 34-year-olds are still mentally children?
Well, I obviously I've been doing a lot of thinking, a lot of reading on this kind of thing lately, and in a circuitous route, it kind of led me back to Alan Moore and the work he did, kind of in the maturation of comics as a medium, and sort of his reasons for including sex and including sexual violence and so on in his works was that seemed to him better than pretending that these things don't happen. And you would think after, I mean, it took what, 40 odd years for comics to kind of mature as a medium in the 80s, after the setback of the Comics Code. And it's been about that long for role-playing games. At this point, we should be capable of running adult-oriented games that deal with dark themes and so on without someone throwing their toys out the pram. But instead, we seem to be having all these insistences on things like lines and veils and X cards and safety tools, and you're not allowed to tackle these subjects in a game for whatever reason. As far as I'm concerned, if you advertise a game as 18 plus horror mature themes, you're covered. And when someone signs up for that game and sits down at the table and stays there, that's their consent and their ongoing consent. I mean, you can always make your apologies and leave the table. You don't need an X card or whatever else for that. But it seems like we need to institute an X rating rather than higher than an 18 rating, so that people know you're not going to pull any punches and you have no right to whinge about it.
I'd suggest that we call it the "Don't Be a Pussy" rating.
But I kind of partially piss took out of the X card by making what I called an M card, which is basically telling you, if you're the kind of person that's going to get triggered by a half-hearted description in a brightly lit room around a table with a bunch of other people and some dice, you can fuck off. So I don't know what the solution is, because those kind of people are still going to sit at your table.
What does the M stand for then? Mature?
Mature, yeah.
Okay. I don't know if it was some British slang for fuck off.
Could stand for Muppet, I guess.
There you go. But before we leave the story, I have a story of my own that relates, kind of. This is about 15 years ago, and I was a player in a 3rd edition Dungeons & Dragons game. I was playing what I think was a mid-level monk, maybe. Maybe I was like 7th, 8th level or something like that. And one of the scenario, at the end of one of our games, we got in this big pitched battle with like ogres or trolls or some like big muscular humanoid race, and it was like one of the epic fights of the campaign, probably. And we knew we weren't going to finish, and so it kind of ended abruptly. Since we were winning, the ogres or whatever were like running back into their tunnels to go away and just like flee or run for the hills, whatever. And I was, I'd been wounded, but I wasn't that bad off. And so I decided to I think we were on the top of this ridge or something, to like jump down and like go into the tunnels and either like try to kill a couple of the stragglers or just see what was going on, or I don't know. I don't know what possessed me, but it was just kind of like a heroic, I want to keep fighting and no retreat, no surrender kind of thing. And so then we broke, and then it was a week or two later when we just picked back up. I remember thinking because I was all like full of myself and like, oh, my character's awesome, and thought what I did at the time was pretty cool. And I knew the game master had like a week or two to like think about what might happen or plan something interesting or cool, maybe another fight, or who knows what could happen down there. And then we resume the game, and he basically says like, oh, well, we fast forward like a week in time, and you find your companion, who was my character, like bloody and beaten, and basically he didn't go into extreme detail, but everybody at the table knew at the time that I had been sexually, male character had been sexually assaulted by these ogres or what have you. And it was kind of funny, but at the time I was like a little mad because I just thought, hey, you just took all my agency away. Like, I probably had at least half my hit points, and these guys were like running away. Like, did they jump me? Like, what the fuck happened? And also, I thought it was kind of like a missed opportunity for my heroism of like charging into these guys, and And of course, nobody wants to be the character that got, raped, ass raped by the opposition. But then, you know what? I took it in stride. About 10 minutes after that, I just shook it off. It was fine again, and we played. If I had been that upset about it, I would have either made a big deal about it at the time, not after the game, but during, or I would have got up and left, which I've done in games. I've played in games that just were so boring or stupid or whatever that I was just gathered on my books. I was see you guys, I'm out. I've got a thing right now. You can do that. You don't have to whine on Twitter after the fact to try to get virtue points or whatever. Cyber backpats. That's just fucking stupid. So I've been through it, and
I do think, though, that you could say that to run a game with a setup like this guy had in a convention with people who presumably you're not going to know, right, with players that you're not going to be familiar with, in the current year, that's also showing a remarkable lack of caution. Let's put it that way, right? And I'm not saying that we shouldn't necessarily self-censor, but I also think, regardless of it being current year, that when you're running a game at a con, you're running a game for people that you don't particularly know, right? You could have, if you're playing with a group of your friends, you could have certain sorts of scenarios, be it humor or stuff that's edgy, that because they know you, they're going to know the context of that, right? I can imagine, when you get to a con and you're playing some game and you get a game master like that, you're well, okay, is this guy being clever or is he just a pervert? There is that, right? I don't know. It's not the sort of game I would ever run at a con, right? Or the sort of scenario, or at least not with that particular element.
It's a fairly is, writes a movie, not just for himself or his friends, but a movie-going audience, thousands, perhaps millions of people that are going to see this. And, every once in a while you get a different kind of story or a unique voice. You get a movie like, I Spit on Your Grave or Last House on the Left, or,
Right, but when you go to the movies, it's very unlikely that you're going to be going to a movie thinking that what you're going to be getting is something like, Shaun of the Dead or Dude, Where's My Car? And it ends up being The Human Centipede or something like that, right? That doesn't, that's a lot less likely to happen. People will go to gory movies knowing that they're going to be gory, right? Because
the internet kind of spoiled things a little bit because, you see a movie. Well, movies always have trailers and previews, and there's stuff on YouTube. There's people talking about this, and there's even 2 weeks before a movie drops, there's word on the street of what's going on. But back in the 80s and the 90s, you heard a movie, a movie's title. Maybe a friend of a friend of a friend said "Oh yeah, they saw that. It was good." And then maybe there's a small black and white picture in the movie guide that goes along with the title. That's all you knew about the movie. You went in hoping to be surprised and entertained. After a while, wanting something different, something edgy, something that grabs you by the balls. And every once in a while you got that. Not anymore. Now it's all previewed and sanitized, and everybody knows, everything except the most egregious spoilers by the time it opens. And so
we could spin this topic on forever.
This episode is also called Gen Xers whining about how nothing's as cool as it used to be.
Yes. We could spin this on forever. There's so many other topics that intersect with it, like the nature of horror gaming and consent, I guess. You brought up Dude, Where's My Car? How much fun would that film be if you already knew everything that had happened while they were out of their minds on drugs, rather than finding it out through the story? And yet, by asking for all this consent up front about what their characters would and wouldn't do, or what would and wouldn't happen to them, You steal all of that away. It's just.
I made a video about this where I said the only consent a player has is to leave the table, right? Like they don't get to make any other demands. It can be a good question of courtesy for a DM to warn players if there's going to be certain mature themes in the game. But the player has no right to say, well, you can't do this in the game. They have the right to either keep playing or to walk away. And that's pretty much it. We've got some comments.
Other game masters don't have the right to be like, oh, well, if you're game mastering, you can't do X, Y, and Z. Like, if I'm the game master, I will do whatever the fuck I want. Like, you're not going to tell me, some douche on the internet is going to tell me how to run my fucking game.
Which still doesn't mean that it's wise to do whatever the fuck you want in certain contexts, like when you're playing at a gaming convention with people you don't know, right?
It's risky.
Yeah,
I will grant you it is risky. I probably wouldn't do it because I'm a little bit more of a cautious fellow, but I applaud his. See, the thing is, he didn't even have that in his game. But even if he had, even if the worst was true, I have to give him some sort of props just for like going there and just having the balls to do that. I mean, game mastering just by itself isn't easy, but taking it to that level, maybe there's a screw loose with a guy, or maybe he's worthy of the name Game Master.
Yeah.
All right.
Even 5 years ago, right? Even 5 years ago, this would have been a battle scar story. This would be I had an awful GM, a con. Listen to this. This was really funny. It would be a war story. Even 5 years ago, but not anymore. Anyway, should we move on? Speaking of whiny pussies and safe spaces.
Before changing the subject, I want to look at some of the comments from the chat here. Kevin DeJordy says, cons are catering to the most whacked out nut job in that space to minimize their liability. Fred Daniel says, being a self-described old school leftist, I refuse to abandon the left to the lunatic fringe that are so vocal. Well, good luck with that.
That's three of you. Three left.
Knight of the Rose says, Grim and Pundit are the kind of people who could probably benefit from these X cards, but people aren't immature enough to use them. Okay. I detest X cards and would never allow them in my game. Dracopol responds to Fred Daniels saying, you can be dedicated to a movement for decades, but if you're old, you won't be listened to. It's always year zero with the revolution mongers, even if no problems exist. We've got, Scott Charlton says, Pundit, is that an XXL sized gravity bong? I think he's referring to this, which no, it isn't. This is yerba mate, which is the national drink of Uruguay. Today I'm drinking some mate instead of some coffee. And you drink it in this type of gourd. That this is just leather on the outside, but traditionally it was wrapped in the ball sack of a bull, and you put in the herbs in there, the herbal tea, and you drink it. And you pour boiling hot water in here, and you drink it out of a metal straw. Let's think about that for a second, right?
He's lying. Bull scrotum pot. That's all it is.
Greenbang says, staged cat appearance drinking Pundit's yerba mate coming soon. None of my cat appearances are staged. Miko Savolainen says, grieving about something on social media is the modern equivalent of I'm going to tell my mama of yesteryear, but with a hell of a lot more consequences. True. E.S. Taylor says, Gen X is the rock and roll gen. Well, no, those were the boomers. Gen X is the punk gen. And then we've got a bunch of people commenting on how awesome Gen X is. All right, let's move on to the next topic.
So you guys had more interaction with them than I did, but Swordsfall is the thing, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. Oh, the guy. Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Sword Dream?
Yeah, and Sword Dream is the AstroTurf.
I should note that this guy Swordsfall, which I've had zero interaction with, by the way, is not the guy that invented Sword Dream. They just sound alike.
Okay.
Sword Dream was invented by some soy boy story gamer. So I call it Soy Dream. And for those of you who aren't aware, you've got the OSR, right? And for like 2 years now, you've had the SJW contingent of the gaming world desperately trying to first infiltrate and take over the OSR. And when that didn't work, because the OSR is just too decentralized, it has no central command, no central leadership, no single big company, nothing they could infiltrate and then dominate. They decided to start declaring that the OSR is toxic. And for the last several months, the last year more or less, SJWs have been doing a variety of different attempted attacks on the OSR to destroy it. The starting point of which is to say that the OSR is full of evil alt-right, white supremacists, like Venger here and myself and other people. That we are alt-right white supremacists by virtue of not agreeing with every single thing they demand. That's the only condition nowadays, apparently, in these assholes' minds for being a white supremacist. And declaring things like that, Gary Khan should be abolished, that all the people involved in the OSR are toxic, blah blah blah, stuff like that, right? And a few months ago, when Google Plus was shutting down, they tried this thing called the Honorable OSR, which was like the idea of saying, okay, so we can't destroy it because these guys just aren't going to listen to us. So what we're going to do is we're going to create another OSR that is like the SJW version of the OSR, and therefore declare that anybody in the regular OSR must now at this point obviously be one of the fascists or whatever you want to call it, because if you're honorable, you'll be in the honorable OSR. And nobody paid attention to them. And now several months later, they've decided to try again by rebranding the OSR as something they called Sword Dream. And first of all, that's an awful, awful name. It's an awful name for a brand. It's an awful name for a hashtag. It opens itself up to all kinds of mockery. Then they made a logo for it that looks like a very phallic looking sword emerging from out of a ball sack. I kid you not. You have to look at the image to believe it, but it's like that. And that if you're an old school gamer and you continue to use the OSR tag, that means now that you're obviously one of these evil white supremacist types, and that all the good people will use the Sword Dream tag, which is going to be controlled by these SJWs from a Discord server that is invite only. And they're going to define what their rules and conditions are. And all of this is, of course, to stop us right-wing evil gatekeepers. They're going to stop us by trying to gatekeep the entire OSR and by making political litmus tests for membership, right? So it's just been absolutely ridiculous. I made a video about this. You can check out my video on my own YouTube channel, where like the most hilarious thing is that within less than 12 hours, they started fighting amongst themselves, right? Like you had the feminist faction that came along saying, I like your idea, but why did you have to pick something so masculine as a symbol, as a sword, right? Because a sword is like a penis. And so if you support Sword Dream, you're a rapist and stuff like this, right? Like it's just been a ridiculous cavalcade of SJW idiocy. So far, several days in, they've spent a lot of time virtue signaling. They've made a few posts about how awful old school gamers are. They've now decided that in Sword Dream, it's like the OSR, except you don't actually have to be based on D&D or old school gaming at all, which means that basically it's nothing like the OSR. And they've accomplished absolutely nothing. But it sure has been fun to mock these assholes. I don't know if there's anything else to add about that, but you guys pick it up from there.
I was fairly sure the Swordsfall guy was involved, though he's got me blocked. He's come out in support of it, and of course in condemnation of people like you and Venger and myself. Even though, like I said, I've never once interacted with the guy. I've never retweeted him. I've never, commented on him.
But he's one of these devotees of Daniel Fox, right? Like he's one of his business associates. Which means, given the track record of Fox's business associates, he'll probably be caught up in some kind of a sex scandal in a little while. But well, the other guy, of course, Daniel Fox, immediately jumped on that hashtag to sell his Zweihander game, which is incidentally not in any way OSR or, as far as I can tell, related to Sword Dream at all. But that's what you get when you're nothing but a huckster,
Right, so the OSR isn't gatekept. Anyone can take on the name and do whatever they want with it, essentially. There's no gatekeeping there. But their version is gatekept. Basically, if you don't agree to this nebulous set of rules that they haven't even apparently decided yet and are fighting each other over, then you can't be part of this. So it's gatekept. The OSR isn't overtly political in any particular way. This is. I mean, what is the point of it? All I've seen is that they've alienated a ton of people who are associated with the OSR, who are sick of it being labelled as right-wing or toxic or whatever, and it's made them entrench their support for the OSR, not go against it.
Yeah. Kid Cavalier in our comments says, Sword Dream is not making identity politics better, it's making the OSR worse. Well, I would disagree. I think that they're actually, the long-term effect of this, hang on a second. The long-term effect of this, Kid Cavalier, is that they're going to make the OSR better by not being in it anymore, right? They've auto-eliminated themselves. So go ahead, Avenger, sorry.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah, I was going to say I don't think people who actually clued in or belong to the OSR, even if they know these people exist, these Sword Dream people, or Swordsfail, as Pundit called them.
Soy Dream. I call them Soy Dream.
Yeah.
I call them Swordsfail.
No one, even if you know that they exist, no one associates them with the real OSR. And there's something else that within the OSR, there like Grim said, there is no gatekeeping. However, you have sort of a meeting of the minds with your peers, and you talk about things, you discuss them, and people talk a lot about, toxic masculinity. Well, one of the awesome non-toxic parts of being masculine is you can have a good spirited debate with your friends, maybe other guys, maybe girls too, and you can discuss what you think the OSR is or is not, and what you want to do with it, what you don't want to do with it. I mean, Pundit and I go back and forth. He thinks that some of my things are OSR and some aren't, and I, feel differently. And we have these spirited exchanges, and it's fine. And we can we can discuss things. We can even jab at each other and call each other out, and call bullshit on whatever, and then we come back to the table, and we each have our individual view. We don't have like this hive mind collective, like there must be one answer to it. Everybody has their own interpretation. And then after you're done sparring, you go back to your separate corners, and you live your life and you do your thing. You create your masterpiece or whatever. And then later on, you get together with other people, you talk, you discuss, rinse and repeat. And that's something that's awesome about being a man and masculinity is you can go off and you can fight with people, and then you make up, or you just maybe you go your separate ways, or you agree to disagree, and that's cool. And then there's no more drama. You fight it out, and then or argue it out, then you're done, and you get to it.
It's true. It's true that the OSR has been almost aggressively apolitical, right? Like, as in not interested in any way in politics. and that also the OSR has had a long tradition of rejecting the idea of any spokesperson, any pope. There's no pope of the OSR. That's almost a meme at this point, right? That different people over the years tried to be that and were rejected by the OSR, right? And the people I think are the most influential in the OSR tend to be the ones that have done the least of that. And I think that that's part of the problem. That's why the SJWs hate the OSR so much, is because it doesn't allow them to take control of it, right? That it's an organization, it's a movement that has nobody in control, and therefore they can't control it.
Yeah. Ultimately, though, if they want to go over there and make their own games and do whatever, that's fine, so long as they don't try and impose it on anyone else. And going back to conventions, that's what worries me, is people are going to try and enforce these X cards and everything. And if Sword Dream is trying to enforce their particular code of, I don't know, political tick boxes or whatever on other people, that's not good. And you just know that they're going to define themselves in opposition to what other people are doing. Just fuck off and make your own shit and leave everyone else alone. What's wrong with that?
Absolutely. In the comments here, we've got Kid Cavalier says, I don't care what your orientation, race, or background is. As long as you're a fun person to play games with, I would welcome you at my table. Well, exactly. And that's exactly, I think, the spirit of the OSR, right? Is that we only care that you game. We don't care about any of this other stuff. And of course, because we don't care about identity politics, that's what they claim makes us far right. And it's part of the problem for them. Mr. Triceratops says, I want to sneak into this Discord to see the insanity. A few Sword Dream pundits blocked me on Twitter just for being critical of Sword Dream. Yeah, I can only imagine what's going on in that Discord.
Oh.
Aaron the Pedantic says, Grim randomly mimes brushing his teeth. Okay. Horace Vestige says, it's like I said before, they know nothing about what the OSR is because they don't understand freedom. They have oppression brain. Miko Savaloinen says, hey, Daniel Fox gave me money for something I wrote 10 years ago. I took it. All right.
Take the rest of his money.
Yeah, please. I'm not sure how much there is there, but whatever. Kid Cavalier says Virgin Wizards of the Coast versus Chad TSR. I'm not sure. I guess they're debating about whether Wizards has helped or hindered the OSR. Jacopole says SJWs are triggered by the OSR because it has stats like strength, intelligence, constitution, wisdom, and charisma. They have none of these, so they feel the OSR doesn't represent them.
That's good. Funny.
Aaron the Pedantic says, there's no such thing as apolitical to the social justice types. You're in support of the status quo, which is oppressive. Well, that's the thing. The OSR is totally apolitical, but it is traditional in the context of gaming, right? Because it appeals back to an old school style play and to old school game concepts, even though what we do is create new games, based on those old principles. And sometimes those new games can be radically innovative. But there's still this undercurrent of saying basically that gaming as it originally was a good thing. And that goes completely contrary to the narrative that the SJWs have tried to present, which is that gaming has been horribly toxic all throughout history until they arrived to try to fix it, right?
Oh, if I could just step in there for a sec.
Yeah.
So in the computer gaming world, which is probably why we're going to have a small audience tonight because everyone's watching the E3 stuff. But Cyberpunk 2077 came out with various things. And so immediately people latched onto that to decry them for their supposedly transphobic comments. I think their Twitter account said something that could, with a fair wind and whatever, be interpreted as transphobic, but then decided to go against the tabletop game by saying that having sex change surgery and so on had an associated humanity cost in that system. so that if you had your body changed from male to female and had cybernetic implants and so on to make you more like the gender, and
that is
lost some humanity.
Holy shit!
Yeah, that was somehow transphobic. Now, Cyberpunk had a tie-in supplement with When Gravity Fails, a series of cyberpunk novels that were very much ahead of the curve in terms of trans acceptance, and they were set in the Middle East and so on, and they offered all these options for changing your gender and everything. It had great big passages, all of it very sympathetic. Role-playing games and the role-playing community have always been ahead of the curve on accepting people. Right? If there's a slight rule for humanity loss or whatever from surgery and so on, that's just to be consistent with the rest of the game and the themes around, what makes us human, how does integrating machinery change us, and all the rest of it. But the idea that a game that essentially pioneered trans inclusion and gave you all these options and so on is transphobic is just insane. You have to be completely ignorant of the history of the game to think that. And yet there it is, getting traction on social media. It's just nonsense.
You probably also have to be ignorant of the research on, trans individuals have the highest rate of suicide of anybody, like anybody on Earth. And so if you don't think that's innately feeling like you're not the right gender or in the right body or have the right parts, it just seems obvious that that's going to fuck with your head a little bit and maybe make you feel alienated, depressed, maybe other things. So it just stands to reason that, there would be some sort of cost to that or some sort of detriment.
Right, but that's not because of the surgery, right? Although some studies have sort of shown that the surgery doesn't actually change any of that, like it doesn't actually make it better for them. But it's not that that happens after you get reassignment surgery or what have you, right? Yeah. In any case, I would say that from my point of view, I've always thought that kind of humanity mechanic, which is really just was set up originally as a way to stop all of your players becoming 100% cyborg right from the start, right? Has always been kind of an ill-fitting mechanic, right? Like, I don't think that it's necessarily true to the literary genre of cyberpunk, and it's kind of stupid when you think about it, right? Like, if you're a guy who lost an arm and now you have a prosthetic arm, that doesn't make you less human or make you necessarily feel less human. It does have a lot of other potential issues, right? But describing it as humanity loss is never, to me, really fit right in the thing. And it was always mostly meant to be a limiting rule. It was an example of a badly done rule because it was a rule that was meant to mechanically stop Munchkin players from abusing the system, right? It was nothing to do with accurately reflecting the world, even though now it's become kind of a canon of most cyberpunk type RPGs. You
can look at some of the influences, like the AD Police episode, The Man Who Bites His Tongue, Loss of Humanity there, and RoboCop, and it is a theme that runs through cyberpunk fiction and then into transhuman fiction. What's human, what isn't human, how much can you change before you cease to be human, what are the psychological effects of becoming this. But
that's very different than because you get cybernetic implants. The most often thing we see this in cyberpunk as a genre is where cyberpunk starts to overlap with transhumanism, and this idea that if you're a cyber decker, hacker, whatever you want to call it, and you're spending more time on the net than in your body, right? Like how connected are you to your humanity anymore and stuff like that? Because humanity is a product of consciousness, not a product of our physical appearance or something like that, right? So it's really a question of where does how much of our consciousness remains human. So I would actually say that a more accurate way to reflect this in a game would be that any sort of cybernetic or hacking style activity that would alter your mental stats or what have you, or that alter your abilities. Like if you can just download a kung fu program and now you know kung fu, right? What does that do to your humanity, right? I don't think having a cybernetic arm would change your sense of humanity, but if suddenly you can like rewrite all of your memories, that could change your humanity. Anyway, I've kind of gone off the tangent there, but I've always thought that was a bit of a pet peeve of mine about a lot of cyberpunk games. And if I ever do a cyberpunk game, which is not something I'm planning to do, but if I ever did, I would try to find some other way to stop the rampant, player advantage taking of massive cyber implants that didn't involve saying, "Oh, well, you lose your humanity by taking a lot of cybernetic adjustments."
Yeah. So we got two more topics, and we're getting towards the end of our allotted time, though we tend to always go over.
We're getting to Venger's bedtime is what we're getting to. And if you want Venger to be able to stay up later, if you want him to be allowed to stay for the full episode, please support our Inappropriate characters on Patreon. The more Patreon support we get, the longer that Venger can stay up.
Yeah, because then they'll be able to bribe his wife with jewelry and ice cream and things. It'll be good. Exactly. But I think the last thing was one of Venger's topics, which is like you said in the pre-show, it's been like 50 years in internet time, but the Game of Thrones ending, which disappointed quite a lot of people. So what was your take on that, Venger?
Yeah, even having watched that final episode like 6-7 days ago, it does seem like a lifetime ago. But I think everybody could see where the showrunners, where the writing of George R.R. Martin had stopped, and they had to fill in the blanks and pick up the pieces and write the rest of it. It's basically, by the way, spoilers, in case you haven't seen it yet.
Everyone's
I'm going to say stuff that, if you haven't seen it, this will spoil parts of it. So be warned. There should have been a little bit more. I've heard people say that there was no foreshadowing of Daenerys's, downfall and her basically going fucking insane and, torturing everything. And so there could have been more than that. I agree that, there was a little bit, but not enough. That was an arc that kind of blindsided some people. I mean, a little bit you saw it, but I wish they would have hammered it home either in the beginning, foreshadowed it a little bit along the way, each episode. But the transition was kind of abrupt, but not totally unexpected. And then basically she gets what she deserves. And then there's a whole lot of what the fuck moments. Like Jon Snow just suddenly ending up in jail the next 3 weeks after the dragon melts the throne. And, how is he not killed? And, they could have ended it a number of different ways. And I feel like they ended it on one of the weakest kind of tracks that they could have. I don't know. What did you guys think?
Well, from my point of view, I was actually thinking that, while I agree with some of your points that Game of Thrones, it definitely got worse in the last few seasons. The writers who took over after the end of the books basically just could not do it justice. And this last season had a lot of errors and was rushed and what have you. I actually kind of liked the ending because the ending had a very good and I think positive message in that it said that, people that have this SJW identity politics-based liberationist ideology are always going to end up becoming mass murderers. And it takes a group of stable white males to stop a hysterical woman. So I think that was, that's great. There's nothing wrong with that. That's a surprisingly conscientious message coming from Hollywood in this day and age.
Okay, this is where Jim and I slowly back away from you.
Yeah. When he says white power, he means WIGHT. Okay, so just so we're clear.
Fireball's gonna hit.
I was just saying, that I was repeating what the feminists online have said, right? Like, oh, in the end of the Game of Thrones, it's a group of straight white males that get to decide who's king instead of it being our Queen Daenerys, slay queen, right? Like, there were people online who are actually saying that it was perfectly fine for Daenerys to burn down King's Landing and she should have been queen because of social justice, right? Which is just insane, right? But I loved it that they spent 8 seasons making especially white middle-class feminist women identify with Daenerys Targaryen, right? Like, she was a substitute for them, complete with the scenes of all the little black people praising her for how wonderfully woke she is, right? And then in the end, they make her into a psychotic mass murderess that has to be stopped by the white male hero of the series, right? Like, that is beautiful, right? Just absolutely beautiful. You can't tell me that's not beautiful.
But they ended up with a differently abled person on the throne. Surely they're happy with that.
That's got to count for something, right?
Right. That more than anything else jarred for me because he told Jon and the others to tell Daenerys that he knew he was the real heir to the throne, which precipitated the entire fuck up and got him on the throne. And yet he was still treated as kind of a hero and reluctant to take the throne. They could have ended with him looking smug and self-satisfied and steepling his fingers and murmuring "excellent," and that would have made more sense. The whole thing was his idea, but the heel.
The incel was actually the one. The Gamergate incel was the one that was behind the whole power grab all along.
Of course, but the Daenerys heel turn didn't blindside me. I think they could have done with 2, 3, 4 more episodes to tie up a lot more things and make a lot more sense of stuff. But if you go right the way back to the beginning, she was basically being abused and raped by her brother and traded off, and she burned down and killed. I don't know whether it's in the series, but it's
look, in the series, if you go back to season 1, right, Khal Drogo promises her that he's going to take his army across the sea and he's going to murder everybody in Westeros and burn down all the castles. And she's like, fuck yes, yeah, let's do that, right? Like, so to pretend like this is someone, I think that even though I agree that the pacing was bad and everything, there was a lot of context there that made it, I think, not as bad as people made it out to be. You had, Tyrion pointed it out really well in the series, right? He said, this is a person that basically murdered anyone that stood in her way. And for most of the series, people were cheering for her because the people that stood in her way looked like bad people, right? And so we kept applauding as, we applauded when she killed the really, really bad people, and then when she killed the bad people, and then she killed the sort of bad people, and people kept applauding because, she's the woke heroine. And then she started to just murder normal people. Like, what did you expect would happen? It's a perfect summary of what happens with social justice movements, with neo-Marxism, with Maoism. Like, if I didn't know better, I would swear that the writers of that last episode had to be like, MAGA hat wearing Trump supporters or something. They had to be like, members of the intellectual dark web, because they could not have made an episode that was more spectacularly, and I'm sure completely accidentally, representative of the flaws of the entire modern, SJW identity politics leftist thinking than that. They couldn't have made it more a better condemnation of that entire philosophy. And for that alone, I think it was a great episode.
The very last line that Daenerys utters before he kills her is, they don't get to decide. And at that moment, he was like, you know what? That could be
the motto. Yeah. You don't get to decide could be the motto of the Sword Dream hashtag, right? It could be the motto of the people who who pushed for Satine Phoenix to disavow Grimm, right? Like that's them. That's them.
The far left crazies. Yeah.
If you didn't have 3 or 4 episodes to wrap it up and to really kind of rub home and hint, you could have fixed 90% of the problems with that last episode with a montage. So you have Daenerys swooping around on a dragon, destroying all the giant crossbows and things, the ballistae or whatever. And then she alights on a tower and is looking down at all the people running and fleeing and screaming. And then just have a montage of flashbacks of her brother being a dick, of Drogo raping her, of her burning down the hut with the other leaders of the tribes, of the slavery and depravity that she saw of people like Tyrion and what's his name, the guy with no bollocks, the Master of Whispers, whatever he was called, him trying to manipulate her. You could have done all of that. You could have gone through every single last bit, even had new scenes of flashbacks to her childhood and fleeing and everything that was done to her family and whatever, and then flashback to her, see the anger in her eyes, and then start burning everybody. And that would have fixed 90% of the problem with the episode, in my humble opinion.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe.
But again, all this happened like 100 years ago in internet time. So
everybody's moving on. Speaking of moving on, I really got to go because.
All right.
All right, Avenger. We'll see you soon.
Thanks, guys. Good show. Support our Patreon because we're just as good as Steven Crowder and Tim Pool and Ben Shapiro. Just as good.
Funnier than Steven Crowder, and I have more hats than Tim Pool.
Right.
Pundit, do you just want to...
Go ahead.
Do you just want to wrap up talking about the Vox apocalypse?
Yeah, now that Venger brought it up as he was leaving, why not? So I don't know what you think about this, Grim, but from my point of view, it wasn't something that affected me, right? I don't know if I don't think your channel is monetized either, right? But my channel isn't monetized.
Mine is.
Ironically, I just got a message yesterday from YouTube congratulating me about how my channel is now, monetizable, right? And it's like, okay, I don't know what to make about that, but this is the fact. Whether or not my channel is monetized, I think I would never put my eggs in that basket, right? For obvious reasons, right? The people who are being really badly affected by this, and I feel bad for everybody who's being affected by this. I agree with the fundamental unfairness of this whole movement of the SJW infiltration in YouTube and the persecution of conservative voices or just non-conforming voices to the SJW identity politics agenda. But if you are trying to make your living being one of the dissenters on YouTube off of YouTube's ad revenue, then you're kind of, you kind of asked for it, right? Because that these people despise you, right? You never, ever want to make all of your living depend on the goodwill of people who despise you. Like, this is why in, One Bookshelf in DTRPG and what used to be RPG Now, I sell books there, but I make it a point to try to always diversify where my books are sold, right? Like I've seen SJWs mock the fact that Lion and Dragon is only an Electrum bestseller or whatever on DTRPG, but it's also only a percentage of the total sales I make because I also sell on Lulu, I also sell on Amazon, and make a point of pushing those points of sale as well. Specifically for that reason, because I don't trust the people running One Bookshelf. And I know that it could be entirely possible that tomorrow they could decide that anybody who is right-wing is going to get banned from their point of sale.
And not even right-wing. I mean, I've had several products banned from the...
Yeah, anyone in opposition to the SJW. Sure, anybody who's free speech.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there's no consistency to it. I don't think it is exactly ideologically aligned, though I think if you are more traditionalist or conservative, I'm going to disagree with you, but you're going to have your right to speak as far as I'm concerned. I think you're more likely to get trouble if you're in that, but I don't think it's limited to that. It's weird. I've done a couple of videos, not negative at all, about the LGBT community, and they've been demonetized seemingly simply because they mention LGBT. Even the acronym gets flagged up. I've got a couple of plugins that tell me what keywords are problematic so far as YouTube's concerned, but that's a result of this censorship. And after this recent wave of censorship, a whole bunch of historical channels, of World War II channels and so on, all got hit. Some of them got completely removed. I think they've been restored now. But that's always the way with censorship. To me, this whole affair reminds me of Gamergate a huge amount, because what really sparked Gamergate was this spate of gamers are dead articles and people's reaction to that. Now we have a spate of YouTube as a funnel to the far right, and they're scooping up a whole bunch of people who have nothing to do with even political commentary at all. Really, they've gone after Philip DeFranco, who just presents the news in his own style. They've gone after gamer channels for being angry, and the reaction that's going on seems to me to be reminiscent of Gamergate as well. A lot of the bigger voices in the YouTube community and so on have come together, and they've decided to fight back by going after the media's advertisers. I think it'll all end up going pretty much the same way. So while I think that the YouTubers have the moral and ethical right of things, and I think they'll win a few victories, I think they'll still be remembered falsely as far right, conservative, anti-gay, anti-woman, anti whatever, even though for a lot of them that's not true, just as Gamergate gets remembered as a misogynistic hate movement when it was anything but, and achieved a lot of good things. So
but when you look at what happened there with Gamergate, right? Sure, a lot of people were tarred by the SJW reporters, and yet Gamergate basically led to Trump winning the election, right? Like, there was a massive Streisand effect that happened there, like a huge. And YouTube,
I would dispute that, but I think it did lead to a lot of suspicion of mainstream media and so on. So I think it didn't hurt.
Right. Well, and what I'm going to say is YouTube is like an order of magnitude bigger, right? And the channels on YouTube and the people we're talking about here, it's like a whole other level. We've already heard that Google and Facebook and Twitter are all being investigated now in the United States for basically antitrust investigations, right? There's a lot of talk now about passing laws that are going to finally enforce this distinction between platform and publisher, which would basically mean that places like YouTube will either have to stop censoring conservatives or open themselves up to massive lawsuits, right? And I think that, again, what you've had here, like, I can tell you somebody who hasn't lost anything out of all of this. It's Steven Crowder, who was the guy that was the original target of Vox. He had the biggest single day boost of subscribers to his mug club, right? And he's a good example of what I was talking about earlier, where he doesn't depend on the monetization of his videos to make money. He has his little group, his website that you can sign up to get extra videos and stuff like that. In a similar way that, like, I don't use Patreon. We use Patreon here. And I have a Patreon account, but I have like 3 subscribers on there. And if you want to support me on Patreon, go right ahead. But what I tell people in my videos is if you want to support me in my work, then buy one of my books or buy one of my RPG Pundit Presents PDFs, right? And the income from that supports me. And so it means that I'm not dependent on monetized videos or things like that. Crowder has probably ended up making a bunch of money he would never have made out of all of this, right? He's coming out a winner on this. Plus he's become more famous than he ever was before, because he was kind of a, I mean, he was famous within certain circles of the kind of, we're going to call it the populist right. But now he's becoming much more of a household name because of what's happened, right? So I think that the long-term effect of this might just end up being like, I wouldn't be surprised if it meant YouTube either having to radically alter its policies or for it to stop being the single dominant force in the production of videos. It's entirely possible.
Yeah, you need a kind of critical mass of people to either abandon YouTube or move to another specific platform to give it that level of success. The problem with that is that entities like Twitter and Facebook that people have left en masse to join places like Gab or Minds or whatever, those alternatives get flooded with the kind of people that you don't necessarily want on your platform, but because you're a free speech platform, you want to allow them there. But they then become the dominant voices on that platform, and then it's very easy to point at those platforms and say, they're full of Nazis, or they're full of hardcore pornography, or whatever else it might be that's the reason du jour to hate them. And then it becomes very hard to get the rest of that audience to follow, even if they find themselves increasingly being censored or inconvenienced or whatever else. For my part, even though I take a lot of flack for being on Gab and so on, people go, aha, see, Grim is alt-right. I see my presence there as bringing balance to the force and giving me the opportunity to argue and dissent with the far-right people or the conspiracy nuts or the anti-vaxxers or whatever. I'd rather be there fighting that bullshit than it be a uniform grey political mass where everyone agrees with each other, which is largely the problem with Twitter and Facebook and YouTube increasingly.
Right. Well, I think that trick, that's part of the trick that is part of this unholy alliance between the leftist identity politics crowd and big business in Silicon Valley, which is that to protect their monopoly, YouTube will encourage if people move on to some other platform to declare that platform to belong to alt-right Nazis or something like that, and therefore to scare people away. But I think that trick only works so many times, right? Like it was very effective when they did it to Gab because it was one of the first times they did it. It's been a lot less effective with Minds.com or MeWe or Telegram or what's this? There's another one now that even Donald Trump mentioned at one point. But I think that at some point that's going to become an ineffectual tactic on their part. And now, one thing I will say, though, is that I don't agree with the people saying, well, we should just all move to another platform and abandon YouTube or Facebook or Twitter en masse, because you have to fight on the battleground where it's happening, right? You don't to use the enemy's phrases against them, right? Lenin famously said, you take a step back only to gain momentum, right? And Fidel Castro said, you never take a step back, not even to gain momentum, right? I think that this is a point of view that we have to hold to as well, is to say that you don't concede any ground to these people. You don't let them move the Overton window. We move the Overton window, right? We push it and make their arguments ineffectual. And we fight on their territory, not on ours, because that's always what they want, is they want us to always be fighting on the defensive. I saw this 20 years ago with the story gamer crowd, where they tried to define gaming with a bunch of semantic terms that they invented, and then everybody was automatically on the defensive because those terms assumed certain things, right, that you then couldn't argue against if you were using their terms. So what did I do? I turned it back on them and fought on their territory. I switched the terms around and attacked them there. And you have to do the same thing here. You have to always be on the offensive in this case. And the offensive is going to happen on YouTube.
Yeah, as a left-wing person, it just endlessly frustrates me, because this is a surefire way to not win the argument or the battle. If you drive people off Twitter or Facebook or YouTube who have political ideas that you disagree with, they don't disappear. They go into these other places where they only encounter people with the same ideas as them. And meanwhile, you're only encountering people with exactly the same ideas as you. And both sets of people end up only getting exposed to similar ideas and end up getting more and more extreme and more radicalized. And if you don't have the arguments, if you don't have the debates, then you get, metaphorically speaking, fat and lazy, and you lose the capability of making the arguments. And then these radicalized people who've been honing their craft maybe come back, and censoring them doesn't do any good. People start wondering, oh, do they have something interesting or accurate to say? And if you accuse everyone of being a Nazi when they're not, people look at one person who's been accused of being a Nazi, and they can clearly see that they're not one, and then they start to wonder about everybody else you've called a Nazi. It's a just utterly self-defeating set of tactics that doesn't do anyone any good at all on either side.
The SJW movement definitely likes to use their nuclear options early, right? Like, and this is what is ultimately, I think, going to be their undoing. Like, they jump right to calling you, a Nazi or whatever. And so what they've done is they've destroyed the meaning of that word. And that's something that you really want to, I think that's one of their biggest crimes, you could say, is that all of the things that they've done in polarizing in this way and in redefining things that were meant to be really serious into just being anyone that disagrees with them, it's destroyed some of the safeguards we had in society, right? That we could know who the Nazis were. We could know who the white supremacists were. We could know who were the really bad people. We knew what a rapist meant, right? All of these sorts of things that now mean nothing, and therefore gives a type of cover to the people who really are that way. And you see this all the time with them. Like, right now, there's all this talk going on in the media and in circles in the United States and in leftist circles in the US about how there's a big push for Congress to impeach Donald Trump. Right? For what? Nothing. Just to impeach him. Right? And what effect will this have? Right? I don't know how much you know about the political system in the U.S., but right now the Senate is controlled by the Republicans. Right? So if they impeach Donald Trump now, which there's a ton of people on the left in the U.S. that are demanding that this happen, all that it's going to be is a statement that says Donald Trump is now impeached, because any actual trial will happen in the Senate, which will be dismissed immediately. And therefore, it'll just be a word. It'll just be, hey, haha, we impeached him, right? And what does this do? It destroys the entire concept of impeachment. It means from now on, anytime the House of Congress is controlled by a party opposite the president, that president will be impeached. So impeachment will become a meaningless thing, right? Impeachment will mean nothing, right? Whereas you compare this back when Nixon was threatened with impeachment, and that led him to resign because of how grave that was, right? Like, now it means nothing at all. To be fair, it was something that started when they impeached Clinton, which was also bullshit, right? But at least there they trumped up some charges. Here, they're literally just saying, we're just going to impeach him because we don't like him, because he shouldn't have won because we didn't vote for him, right?
That's probably the real reason, but as I understand it, there is something of a case on the grounds of obstruction. Whether that's enough to convince any Republicans to back it is another matter, but it's just going to fail. And I believe there's historical precedent that if you impeach a president, they become a lot more popular, paradoxically speaking, because it kind of,
and he became more popular. Because people saw it as unfair. They saw it as a witch hunt. I personally really hope they try to impeach Trump, because that'll pretty much guarantee his victory in 2020, right? Like, Because anybody who isn't one of these extreme left Democrats will look at that and say they impeached him for nothing, you know?
Yeah. Well, I hope they don't, because I want Trump out. I want him beaten. But
in the comments, Dracopol says, "How do you obstruct a lack of evidence?" Which is a very good question. As for Trump, well, you had a rough election the other week, didn't you? The Brexit Party has become the dominant political force in Britain now.
They still only got around a third of the vote, which is about
but it's the most ever, the most that any single party has ever had in the European Parliament.
It's still only very slightly higher than UKIP got in the previous one, but UKIP have basically disappeared now as a political force. And the explicitly pro-Remain party's got a higher percentage of the vote. Overall,
the explicitly pro-Remain parties?
Liberal Democrats, Greens,
right? And the Greens.
The Scottish Nationalist Party, the Welsh Nationalist Party. They do. Look, they got seats.
All of the other parties, you could have voted for them for other reasons than the Brexit question. There was an obvious Remain party. There was a party that just like Brexit is a one-issue party, there was a one-issue Remain in the EU party, and they got zero. They failed completely.
They got roughly the same percentage as UKIP did, I think. So basically, that election has ended up telling us really nothing that we didn't already know, that the country is basically divided into thirds. One third is still pro-Brexit, despite everything. One third is very anti-Brexit, and another third is just kind of, don't really care at this point. So yeah, we're nowhere. We're still stuck in the quagmire, and whoever ends up prime minister is going to be facing exactly the same interminable issues that Theresa May did. It's not now.
It's one very easy way to terminate it. It's just fucking leave, you know.
It's being in government. I think they know explicitly exactly how damaging that's going to be, and they know it's a poison chalice, and that any government that delivers on Brexit is going to be unelectable for a generation.
The Conservative Party is full of people who don't actually want to Brexit, right? It's full of Remainers, right? It's an institutionally anti-Britain and pro-Europe, right? So like this
I don't think that's mutually exclusive.
It's like if you had a person who was working for Monsanto and you sent them to try to negotiate a deal to get Monsanto to be less polluting, right? Like that's the situation here, right? That's who's negotiating right now, and this is why there's a problem. I think that the Conservatives, if they don't do a Brexit, if they don't achieve a real Brexit, not the one that you had Verhofstadt's people laughing about how you're going to become a colony, right? That deal, if you do that deal or you remain, then the Conservatives will be doomed as a party, right?
And if they do deliver Brexit, they'll be doomed as a party. So yeah, this is basically the problem that we have, is that the whole thing is just poisonous and toxic. And that's why Labour's been kind of sat in the background, not taking one position or the other. They're just kind of hoping that the Tories fuck it up and then they're in power for a generation. But we're well off topic, and we should probably wrap.
All right, fair enough. Let me see if there's any last minute comments here. What have we got here? Somebody pointed out that Matt Mercer of Critical Role was being very apologetic to this Maza guy, the guy that started the Voxpocalypse, for all the abuse he had suffered, which is a crock of shit, right? But that's typical of Matt Mercer, right? He's never met an ultra left wing cause he didn't find a way to be patronizingly fake concerned about.
My only issue with him is retconning a character death for no good reason other than social pressure. That's enough.
Well, that is a serious crime from a DMing point of view. No question about that. It means he's a complete pussy for starters, right? Kevin DeJordy said, like Grimace said before, the battle is only won, the war is fought forever. Okay. And then he says, like Sword Dream and whatever movement they will try and organize next month, they will have to be beaten back forever.
Yeah.
E.S. Taylor says, Trump 2036. God Emperor Trump. Aaron the Pedantic says, Sargon for Kekistani ambassador to the UK. Buried Axeblade says, it's either Brexit or bow to the Vatican.
I think you're a couple of centuries too late for that one.
Yeah. Well, you still have to wonder about I think that the reason we don't have a Prime Minister Rees-Moggs is anti-papism in UK politics.
Well, yeah, my ancestry is all parliamentarian Protestant, so yeah, you're talking to the wrong person there. Damn papists.
Well, I'm an anti-papist myself. I guess that's about it for today. We'll stop on that note of our agreeing on condemning the Roman Catholic Church. And
back to your priest holes.
Be sure to subscribe if you haven't subscribed yet, and hit that notification bell. Like the video because that helps our optics, and share it everywhere. And if you want to support us on Patreon. The more Patreon support we get, the more likely that Venture won't have to go home early. We'll do videos more often, etc. As far as our own work, well, like I was commenting earlier on the video, if you want to support me, the best way to do it is pick up some of my products, either my books like Lion and Dragon or Cults of Chaos, or check out my RPG Pundit Presents PDF series. There's like 80 issues of it by now, and each of them, the priciest one is like $3.99 or something like that. So none of them are going to break your bank, and they'll give you something interesting for your donation. The latest issue of RPG Pundit Presents is RPG Pundit Presents number 80, which is 100 really minor magical items. So it's a bunch of magic items that are very, very low magic, like very small magical effects that are really interesting for you to throw around in your fantasy game. But be wary, because knowing players, they'll find some ways to make these items more useful than they initially appear. I guess that's it for me. You got anything to pimp?
Actual Fucking Monsters is out. If you like a horror game that doesn't pull its punches, and where you play a monster that's actually a monster and not a sparkly Lothario, then go check that out. And I just put out the Lepuna, which are a rabbit-like anime-style race for 5e D&D. You can get all my stuff at post-mort.com, and that's the best place to buy my stuff if you want to support me. It's either got links to it or direct downloads there. That's about it for me. All good?
All right, guys. Currently smoking near a Hawkbill plus Image Virginia.
And I'm currently quivering from drinking too much Monster Energy drink to stay awake to 3 a.m. to do this shit. Good night, everybody.
All right.